I got a request to nap some red jasper, so I found this flake in my stuff. But I don't know if it's something that I collected out of a debitage pile or if it was sent to me by a friend. This piece is so old that I don't remember. I don't know if I heat treated it. But it's just a nice little flake. So as long as I'm gentle with this, it should work out fine. Yeah, it feels like heat treat. Jasper is characterized by not being translucent. Not translucent. And it'll have a solid color to it, a recognizable color, right? It's not going to be a generic gray or tan. It's going to be a more colorful version of a non-translucent chert. That's what a jasper is. A lot of jaspers will have bands of colors. You never really know until you break into it. And a lot of times it does not come in large nodules. It's just small nodules here and there. Sometimes mixed in with other cherts. If you're looking through a gravel bar for your chert for small nodules, sometimes you'll find a nodule of jasper. I have seen jasper eroding out of stream banks as part of a bunch of other gravels. You don't find this much on the surface because Native Americans would always pick it up if they saw it. So you'll find it mainly in eroded areas or areas where they're doing mining and separating out the stones. And then, you know, they leave the area and there's a bunch of stuff left over. I keep getting asked where to find good good rocks in streams and stuff, you know, public access. It's very difficult to get into areas where there's good stone because it's all on private property. Sometimes you can get access if you were in a boat and you're just traveling down in shallow water. You're still in the boat, but you can go down and grab something off the bottom in the river or in the stream while you're in the boat. I used to collect quartz that way when I was little. We would, you know, take canoes out. And I'd break open the quartzite nodules and they were always really sparkly on the inside. So I'd just save them. Didn't know about arrowheads made of quartzite back then. So I didn't make arrowheads out of quartzite. When I was really young, I made arrowheads out of slate. I would just chip them around the edges. I would take a stone, yeah, like this, right, and just kind of hit the edges and chip around the edges on the slate with something else, maybe a little hammer. Just hammer around the edges, and then I'd grind it sharp. That's how I used to make arrowheads when I was between the ages of 9 and 14. Once I started getting into high school, once I got into high school, I lost a lot of interest in doing the Native American and arrowhead thing. I came back to it much later in life because it used to give me a lot of satisfaction sitting and making arrowheads out of slate, I tried different rocks that I could grind down. I did not work with glass when I was little. Okay, yeah, I need to take back the width on this a little bit. It's a little bit too wide to send in long flakes, or to send in flakes long enough to go across the center. That's way too wide usually for me. With this kind of thinness already. Everybody should know the rule by now that it's exponentially harder to thin a thin flake than it is to thin a large or thick flake. So I'm going to get it down to about 1 inch. So I'm going to lose about 1/4 inch on each side. I wish there was a way to speed this up. Oh, there probably is, with a technique that grinds the edges down with a large piece of steel, a relatively large piece of steel compared to this, and just grind the edges down. Take the edges down like that, just dragging it across the edge. But I've never used that method. I tend to just trim it with indirect percussion or pressure. Let's see, I think it still needs a little bit of indirect percussion. I'm not sure exactly what area is best to keep. This is pretty straight on this side, but it's the whole flake is pretty flat, so it's anywhere I start would be fine. My wrist is already pretty sore from doing a bunch of napping this week, although all I've got is just bifaces right now. I think I'll offer mainly bifaces this time around for sale, and blades. Because I didn't really get a chance to sit down and actually nap out some fancy points. But that's okay. The blades and bifaces are pretty much in demand. There's no problem moving those. Everybody wants those too. They want the blades and bifaces. Yeah, this is a heat treat, if I didn't mention it already, for sure. Yeah. Now there's some Jaspers that are glossy in the raw state. And if this is raw, it's pretty rare. 90% sure that this is a heat treat, but it could be raw. All right, so there's always a possibility that there's a lustrous chert that qualifies as a Jasper. This one is translucent in certain areas, so it's a mix. This one is a mix. Of translucent and non-translucent material. I would still call it a Jasper. It's going to be a bit challenging because it feels steppy already and crunchy on the edges. So it's going to be a challenge to get it clean. Yeah, see, because See that right there? All along the edge, it's crunchy, which means it develops these little crushed areas. Some rock will do that easier than others, or more easily. It's more easily crushed than others. And if you use a softer tool, it might help to avoid some of that, but it's going to be difficult to flake because of the hardness. You have to use a lot of force with softer tools. But if I use metal on metal, a sharp, relatively sharp pointed tip on the steel, I don't have to use much force to get a flake to remove. So steel, I think, is good for production work, to do it quickly, to remove material quickly. It's not crushing too badly with the metal on metal. Why does it crush more or worse when I'm using a soft mallet like plastic? I don't know. Maybe it bounces around. I don't know. This one looks like it's removing the flakes clean, except for that one. But I was trying to power through a very steppy area. So the strongest platform is one that's all steppy. If you want a really strong platform, or an area you don't want to mess with, just make sure it's really steppy and crushed. A crushed area is the hardest one to get through. Is that a good thing? Am I saying that because it's a good thing sometimes? No, I'm just saying, I'm just kind of saying it in a sarcastic way, that it's a good platform. It's because it's so resistant to flaking. But actually it's not good. It's just very strong. Strong is not always good. I've got to be careful because the material here is inconsistent. So sometimes, yeah, some of the area responds well to being struck this harshly, and sometimes it doesn't, like this little spot right up here. I removed way too much from that spot, but it took me a couple tries to get it removed from this spot. Just the different consistencies, and heat treat can help that, but there are exceptions. Sometimes heat treat can make it worse, make some spots way too soft. Heat treat can sometimes make some spots way too soft. So you never know. A lot of you guys have already picked up on the various rules for heat treating. You know, you can slab out a nodule. Like for example, you get a nodule of a good looking chert, but it's kind of tough. You're going to heat treat it. Let's say you got a fancy machine that can saw slabs. So you saw the slabs. You'll find that even from the same nodule, each slab will have different napping properties, and different napping properties within the same slab after heat treating, and also before heat treating. And you can have two very different nodules of different kinds of chert, and you'll take slabs out of those. This is also an example. You'll find that maybe sometimes this slab out of this chert nodule is very, very similar to a slab out of a different chert nodule. Very, very similar flaking characteristics out of totally different stones. Okay, so there's that also. And why do I mention slabs? It's because it's more consistent as far as thickness and surface contour. You can compare more easily. Like if I had a spall of one type of chert and a spall of another type of chert, There are different thicknesses usually. Some are more wonky than others. It's not very consistent. You can nap both and you can say, well, I think they're similar, but I can't really tell because one had a big fat turtleback and the other one didn't. So I don't know if the one that had a turtleback was easier or more difficult to nap than the one without a turtleback. Blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing. So if you're, I just mentioned slabs because it's a lot more scientific if you want to do analysis, because it's more consistent. Scientific experiments are best done if you can have some sort of consistency and the ability to reproduce it over and over. Okay, enough of that chit chat. That was for those who don't know. I could tell you everything I know about heat treat in a video, I suppose. I'm going to do some more lecture videos when I get back to Vermont, using some of my drawing ability, try to draw some things out. I was going to do a bunch of hafting videos, of real life haftings that I've done, but it would take me an entire week to prepare for a video like that, and I would lose out on a ton of auction money. So I'm just going to draw them out. I'm going to draw out the different hafting options. That will only take me a day to do the research and all preparation on that stuff. And it'll probably be a several video series, since I'll have to do hafting configurations for ladle darts, at ladle, knives, ladle dart points, knives, and true arrow points. They all have very different hafting characteristics, those three. But within those three, there are different hafting characteristics as well. And seemingly different stems are hafted in almost exactly the same way. You can't, that's one thing also. If you look at a hafted point, you can't see the stem, right? Some of them are, some of the real artifacts in collections are hafted the same way, but the stems are different. But they look almost identical with the wrapping, with the sinew wrapping around them. But if you do the x-rays, the stems are different. Okay, so not only are there different haftings for different styles, there are also identical haftings for different styles. You see what I'm saying? It's a complicated business. There's many options, since we don't know for sure on a lot of these artifacts how they were hafted. I have to give you many options to try to capture maybe one of the options is the one that they used. I can't just go ahead and say this is the hafting method that they used for sure, unless we have an artifact. And the problem with that, there is a problem with that, is that we're only looking at one example. That may have been an outlier. It may have been the most common hafting configuration. The artifact might represent the most common hafting configuration, or it might represent an outlier, or it might represent something in between. So the best way to capture what they might have done is to show you many options. Maybe one of the options is what was done. I'm not going to claim that the options I'm showing are going to be the only ones, and I'm also not going to claim that they are going to be definitely something that was used, because I might be able to, let's see, how do I explain this? I might come up with something that was never used, but that looks reasonable. And also, even with a lot of options, I might miss the one that they actually used. I might forget a configuration that they might have used, or totally miss it. Like there's some stems look like they could be wrapped, like they had wrappings. Very plausible that they could, but they may have only have been glued, and that's it, no wrappings. But it looks like they could be wrapped. But looking like they could be wrapped and actually being wrapped are two different things. So we don't know. So I would also have to show you the glued only option on many of these possibilities. So it takes a while to answer that question. I've had that question many times. How would they have to? I'll just give you a generic answer, but there's a lot more to it. To try to capture what they did. Since we don't know exactly, we'll have to come up with many examples, and maybe one of those examples is the right one. Okay. The right one for that particular point style in that particular geographic area. What's amazing about some points is that they exist over very wide geographic areas. Now, do you think they're going to be using the same glues or same hafting materials in each one of those very environmentally diverse areas? Probably not. Identical points, but hafted probably differently and with different materials. Some of them will rely heavily on sinew. Some cultures rely heavily on plant fiber. Some cultures rely heavily on glue. And some cultures rely heavily on all three. So you could get points that are combinations of those. Now, I don't know if I've seen the combination of plant fiber and sinew on the same point as wrapping, but it's possible. You could wrap it with sinew first and then wrap over the top of the sinew with a plant fiber. Nothing says you can't do that to protect the sinew, keep it from getting wet. Who knows? So how do you haft Clovis as an example? Well, it could depend on where you found the Clovis. In the Northeast, South America, Central America, in the Midwest, in the High Plains. Do you think they all use the same materials and techniques for hafting the Clovis? No? Well, then I'd be wrong no matter what I said. Even if I was right, it would probably only be right for one area and not the other areas. Would it probably look the same? Yeah, basically it would probably look the same. We're assuming the Clovises were heavily wrapped because of the dulling on the sides. I've got my theories about that, but I won't get into it in this video. Why were some points ground and some are not? Why did they grind all the paleo stuff? I used to think it had to do with weather, right? In the cold weather, the glues are not very strong, so you need a really tight hafting. And if you tightly wrap a sharp edge, it'll cut as you're trying to wrap it. So you have to dull it so you're tightening it up. So when you're tightening it up, it doesn't cut. But not all Clovises existed in cold areas like Central and South America. Paleotypes existed back then of the same design with the same grinding. So it couldn't have been just the glue the lack of a good glue requiring hefty hafting, right? So there's got to be another reason. So I'll explore other reasons for grinding the edges. I'm isolating that platform. I don't even know why. I think I know why, but I need to put a lot of pressure on it. See, I'm using a flattish pad, and I shouldn't be, but this is just comfortable. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know where my other one is. If I can't find it in 5 seconds, I usually don't mess with it. All right. So I isolated that platform, but I'm not able to push hard enough to get it to go past halfway. So I'm going to have to use indirect percussion to get rid of that lump. One of the main reasons why I used and developed behind the knee technique for myself is because I could not achieve what I wanted to with billets or with pressure. This is precisely the reason why I developed this type of indirect, so I can get these lumps out from thin material and from delicate material, or from other material as well, right? Although I can get lumps out with direct percussion on bigger material, it's much more difficult to get them out on smaller stuff. Let's see. The metal on metal was working pretty good earlier, so I'll try that again. Yeah, see, much more material can be removed with indirect percussion more easily without having to develop the napper's cramp. I can probably do it with pressure with a big ishi stick, sharpen down, and use copper, which is admittedly the best material for tool tips, usually. But I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, I'm going to do a couple more strikes with indirect percussion. Is there a chance for overshots and cracking everything in half? Yes, there is. I have to be careful. But yeah, I can't do that with pressure. I've said that over and over again in videos. I can't do that with pressure. I can't do that with pressure. Not without developing napper's cramp. I think that's where I was going. I've tried a lot of heavy pressure, and I spent a month doing heavy pressure back in, I don't know, February or something. And my wrist, especially my right wrist, was killing me after a while. Can't do it. Can't do it unless I devise some better type of tool or something. Okay, so I'll finish this out on the next segment. Yeah, it's thin enough now that I can do the rest of the work with pressure, but there's a big original flake scar there, which I don't care too much. But yeah, the tip is going to have to be thin down up here. There's a couple more lumpy areas, but I'll do that in the next segment.